All right, so this is our hotkey list. So this is the way that the test is going to be structured. You will have a navigation section. All of the words will be listed, and then you will just go through from a word drop-down and pick out what the hotkey is. So it'll say orbit view, and then you'll pick from this list which hotkey is orbit view. And then you'll go to track, and then you'll pick from that list which one is track. So you shouldn't have any major issues screwing up something way over here with something over there, because you really can't do that, okay? Some of these are stuff we've already been using, but just to reiterate them. There we go. So this is our orbit. So Alt and left mouse button is what we've been doing already. Alt and middle mouse button is this track. And then Alt and right mouse button is that zooming in and out, okay? So that's what those three are, left, middle, and right. Orbit, track, and dolly. Go to last view is the left bracket, go to next view is the right bracket. So let me bring up what one of the projects we worked on before. So I'm going to set my project to the animated stick. I'm going to open up my Sarcona stick. Actually, it's not open that one. You know what we're going to open up? We're going to open up some mocap. So here's Wade's mocap on a character. And wait for it. And then it just hangs out back there and just does weird stuff. All right, so let's say that we're setting up this shot and we have a specific camera angle we want to render here, right? So I have Wade kind of standing off to the side there. But then I come in and I do that. Now I need to get back. That other camera angle took me 10 minutes to set up and I want to spend 10 minutes. That's where you can use the left bracket to get back to that last view, okay? Or sometimes you're like, I just need to zoom in to see something. So I could zoom in, do whatever I need to do here, and then hit that left bracket and zoom back out, okay? And then right bracket just takes you forward. So sometimes you may do more than one view change, and then you just need to hit the right bracket to get back to where you were, okay? Maya's hotkeys are laid out in a pretty organized fashion where things are actually connected, right? So orbit, track, and dolly, left, middle, and right mouse button, they're all obviously right next to each other. Go to last view is the left bracket, go to next view is the right bracket. So again, easy to see. Frame selected is F, frame all is A. So if I hit A, it will frame everything in the view, right? So if I had something way over here, there it is, and something way over here, and I hit A, it frames everything inside my viewport. And if I hit F on an object, it will just zoom to that one object. Now Maya will also rotate around whatever object I have selected. So sometimes you're over here and it's like I want to spin around this, but for some reason it's still rotating kind of weird. So typically I'll hit this, hit F, and then it'll rotate exactly around it, okay? Inside Cinema, if you remember, they had those different options you could choose of how it rotates around objects. Maya is just like you click on it, hit F, and then you're good. All right, viewport stuffs. All right, so let's say that we are right here, and we want to see how many divisions that this model has. So we can hit 4, and that will show us the wireframe of that model, right? Sometimes you want to see the divisions. Sometimes you want to work in wireframe so you can see through stuff. If I have a cube and I'm trying to look through it and place my character in a certain spot, I may turn this into wireframe just so I can see where the character is kind of placed inside that viewport. If I hit 5, it goes back to that shaded mode, right? So 4 is wireframe, 5 is shaded, 6 is textured. So if I add a texture to this, now we can see the texture. If I hit 5, that texture goes away. Okay, so you may have seen this when you did your Game of Thrones thing, that you added a texture, didn't see it, and then you had to hit 6 in order to see that. Maya can turn those things off so that your system runs quicker. if you had an entire scene full of high-res textures, it eats up a lot of memory and slows down your entire process, especially if you were to hit the play button. Rendering that texture every frame can really slow things down. So it allows you to hit 5 to turn that off. There we go. So 6 turns it back on, and then 7 is for lights. So I don't have any lights inside my scene right now. So when I hit a create a light, and I don't follow as far as like what lights I'm creating or what materials. These are just ones for the demo. Okay. So once I create a light in the scene, now I can see how it looks inside the scene. If I hit 5, that light goes away and the textures go away. If I hit 6, oops, the lights are gone, but the texture's there. If I hit 7, the lights are back. Okay. So again, something that we may want to use just as a preview to see what our lighting is doing. This is again a preview. This is nowhere near what the actual lighting will look like. Okay. Turn that off, turn back to 6. Cool. Rough model, medium, and smooth. So on this cube that I created right here, right there, if I hit 1, it's going to go into rough mode, which is already in right now. If I hit 2, it's going to show me the smooth version and the rough version. If I hit 3, it'll show me just the smoothed out version. Okay. Now, typically when we model something, we want to keep it as low resolution as possible so it's easier to work with. It's easier for me to take this cube and let's say extrude it and pull it up and extrude it and push it in and do whatever to give it some deformation. It's much easier to do that here. If I had an actual sphere, it's very difficult to do what I just did because I have to make sure I grab all those faces, there's like a million faces, and extrude and move and whatever else. Okay. So 3 allows us to actually smooth it out. And then when we smooth it, Arnold will actually render it with the smooth if we have lights in the scene. Let me add an actual light. I'll just add a sky dome and then render it again. There it is, nice and smooth. Okay. Now it's a preview smooth, so you'll see that like parts of this at the very bottom are still blocky. I may need to add an actual smooth to it in order to get that smoothness out of there. I can also turn it up in other ways, but for now, just go with that. All right, whoops. Cool. Standard or full screen. When you're doing any kind of animation, screen real estate is very big, even modeling, even texturing, everything. So a lot of people, when they get comfortable with Maya, they'll work like this. So control spacebar pops basically everything away, so you're just working with what's inside the interface. Now, to get to all your menus, to get to all your stuff that you would typically get to, there's marking menus that we can pull up. So this is kind of similar to like what Cinema would have, where you just hit a letter and then something would pop up, or you right-click and stuff pops up. In Maya, you can customize each one of these. So depending on what key combination I click, I'll get a different menu inside here. That's all the menus I'm going to get from that one. If I click that, I'll get different menus. I click that, I get different menus. So you can customize all of that. I can also hold down the space bar, and this will bring up the hotbox. Every single menu item is right here in front of me. Okay. Most people use the hotbox. I try to use it as often as I can. If I'm being lazy and I'm laying back in my chair and I got my one arm drooped by my side, I'll just use the regular menus, but it's not very often. Usually when I'm just hungover playing in Maya. All right, so that's how we change our standard full screen. And then later on, you'll see the hotbox menu again, so that's where that comes in. Alt-B will change your background color, especially for the different kind of model that you may be working on or different kind of thing you're trying to preview. You may want a different color inside your scene so that you can see it. Let me get rid of this so you can see that. All right, so Alt-B allows us to switch the color of our background, especially up here. On some of these, like that one, you can't even see my wireframe. It's gone because that black just doesn't show up on the projector. Right, so that's obviously much easier for you to see on there. Tab spacebar. So if we need to get to, I'm going to switch this back, more than one view, typically we can just tap the spacebar and that will get us out of this, and then we can jump to a different view. Right, so I think I showed that already. You could also hold the spacebar down, hold the left mouse button right on Maya, and this is typically where I do all my stuff. So if I'm going to front view, side view, whatever, typically I'm going to do that through here. Again, if you're being lazy and you don't want to do either of those things because your other hand is occupied, you can go to Panels, and then you can switch to your front view or your perspective view or whatever through that. Okay? Even this menu, though, is inside the hotbox right here. See, Panels, Perspective. So it's all right there. It's like everything is right in that one box. Sweet. That takes care of that one. All right, all these menus up on top here. This is the modeling menu. If I switch this to rigging, if I switch that to animation, again, easy ways for us to see what's up there. You can also use F2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 to switch between those menus as well. I'm showing you multiple ways to do all of these because as you get comfortable with any software, you're going to find something that works for you. For me, that's what works for me. You could also, unless they've, oops, what did I do there? Know about object selected for toggle. Well, that's a new hotkey. H used to be a little marking menu that would pull up to you can select which one of these you want. Apparently that is no longer the case. H is a toggle for hiding things on and off. That's weird. All right. So there's F2 through 6. Hold the space bar for the hotbox. That's what I told you before. File operations, Control N to open a scene, to make a new scene, O to open, and S to save. Pretty basic stuff from everything else we've kind of done, or you've kind of done over the years. Select, move, rotate, and scale. So selecting stuff, obviously Q is our selector, but you can select things in any view or in any tool. Right? So I'm in the move tool, I can select stuff. I'm in the rotate tool, I can select stuff. I'm in the scale tool, I can still select stuff. Okay? Now the purpose of the having a specific select tool is, let's say for instance, I want to select this back one. When I'm in that rotate tool and I've selected this first one here, the rotate tool basically blocks me from selecting anything through it. So it's like, it doesn't let me select anything, past that. So I could deselect and then select it in a different order, but sometimes it's not possible to do, or sometimes it's not easy to do. Especially on the character here, let's say that I'm grabbing points, and I'm in the rotate tool. I want to grab a whole cluster of points. I can't do that because this is in the way. So that's where I may use the regular select to go ahead and grab all of those points to do that. Okay? So that just makes your life a little bit easier. Move, rotate, scale, so Q, W, E, R are those hotkeys. You should be using all of these because it's just going to make your life a lot easier. Q is select, W is move, E is rotate, R is scale. Show manipulator. All right, let's go here. So let's say I created a light like this, and I want to point the light at my objects down here. So very easily I could just rotate it, and now they're pointed at those objects. But then I decide I don't want the light straight ahead. I want the light over here. Now what I have to do is hit E again to rotate it, and then re-aim it at that. Okay? So if I go to the show manipulator here and hit T, it's hard to see because it's like right on top of it. It'll bring up this little manipulator for the spotlight. And I can use that as a way to tell Maya where the light should be pointing. So I'm saying, hey, you should point at this stuff. And then as I move this back one, you can see how it stays locked into that area, right? So then as we're moving our stuff, as we're doing any animation, it's 10 times easier to animate a light this way than me trying to move it and rotate it to get it all lined up and staying centered on that object. Okay? So that show manipulator is like super sweet. You can also use that show manipulator for other stuff. So if I go here to my face on this wonderful piece of geometry and I extrude it up, this tool that's right here, that's my show manipulator. Okay, that's my manipulator, not my show manipulator, my manipulator. So if I switch accidentally to the move tool and I move it or whatever, I can just hit T to get back to that tool. Okay, so even if I deselected I reselect it, I hit T, it'll bring that back up so then I can move it around. All right, last tool used is Y. So let's say on this shape here, I'm going to use the Insert Edge Loop tool, and I'm inserting some edge loops. Then I switch my tool, I go to the Move tool, and I move this over here, and then I want to get back to that tool. I can go through my menus to get to it, or I can just hit the Y key, and it'll bring me back to that last tool. Okay, so there's several different ways, again, to get to stuff. This just makes it easier. Increase manipulator, decrease manipulator. So this is your manipulator here, this little XYZ axis. The plus sign makes it bigger, the minus sign makes it smaller. This is one that you will for sure get hit up at some point. Right now I'm in rotate and it's as big as my screen, so you can't even see it. So if I switch to scale, you can't see the boxes. If I switch to move, you can't see the arrows. So I use the minus key to make that smaller, okay? So usually what happens is someone hits it on accident, it goes crazy and whatever. So make sure you know those. Completing a tool, enter. Let's say that I'm in a NURB sphere right here. All right, so I'm going to take these two items and I'm going to go to intersect. It's wonderful. And then I'm going to go to trim. So Maya is going to tell me, okay, what do you want to keep? I'm going to say I want to keep this. And then to complete the tool, I hit enter. And then Maya acknowledges that that was done. I go to this one, I hit Y to get back to the trim tool. It says, what do you want to keep? I want to keep this side. I hit enter again, and now it keeps that side. Okay? Now if I had more stuff to trim, I could hit Y to get back to the trim tool, do my trims, hit enter, and so on. All right? So this is, just for conversation's sake, this is a NURB surface. NURBs allow you to take two surfaces, put them together, and trim out one surface from the other. And then I could even add inside here a fillet. Create curves on surface. I don't know what that's going to be yet. Probably on the secondary. That's probably right. And probably 5 because these spheres are so big. And I was wrong on one of those. Nobody tell anyone. There it is. Okay, so this adds a fillet. Make this huge. Good. I'm going to go back to my trim tool, trim that off, trim that off. There we go. So now I can create this shape that goes from this inside curve, rounds off, and then comes around like that. Okay. Now the cool thing about this is it doesn't break that shape. If this was a polygon, this surface may be actually very difficult to create. Probably not for this simple, but that's the idea with it. That's what NURBs do. Move pivot D. So let's say that I have this object here. I want to move the pivot to the top of this. Okay, so this is something, especially for animators, we need to know where pivots are because that's how everything is going to work. So I'm going to hold down D, and then I can move the pivot to, let's say, the top of this. And I let go of D. And now as I move it, or I scale it, or I rotate it, it's rotating from that point. Now if you tap D, this will just get you into the tool, and then you move it wherever you want, and then you hit D again, and then it takes you out of that tool. Okay? Now you could also rotate the pivot. So if I go like this, and then hit D again, now my pivot has been rotated, so then as I scale it, you see it's going to scale like this weird direction. In this case, it doesn't really work as far as what we would want to do it for, but I could move it on this angle, right? So if I'm just moving it along that angle like it's a button on, or a slider on something or whatever, that works perfect. Okay, so move pivot, something we obviously will need to get a hold of. Attribute editor. Everything that typically we've been playing with so far, we've done most of it over here in the channel box, okay? So there's 3 things in Maya that you'll typically like always be bouncing around through. One of them is the channel box, which is this guy over here. One of them is the outliner, which is this over here. And then the other one is our attribute editor. So hitting Control A brings this up. By default, Maya puts it, get in there, right there. By default, Maya puts it inside of where the channel box is, so you can't see both at the same time. And then when you hit Control A, oops, let me get my channel box back. When you hit Control A, it hides the channel box. So typically what I do is I'll hit Control A and I'll pull it out. That way this is all by itself. If I have another screen, I'll move all this stuff onto the other screen because I want that to be separated. Even my outliner, to save real estate on my screen, I'll move this to my other screen as well. But for now, I'll just keep it there. Okay. The attribute editor allows us to go through and tweak a whole bunch of settings inside here and see a lot more stuff than would be over on this side. So, oops, get out of there. So we'll eventually play with that a bit more, but just that's what the attribute editor is going to do. Setting keyframes we've seen before is S. So if I click on my light here and I reset my pivot, and I hit S to set a key, it sets keys for all of the stuff that's inside here. And then if I scoot that over and hit S to set another key, then I'll have animated this thing going from one side to the other. Now remember, for any kind of animation we do, less is more. So we don't want to set keyframes for everything if everything isn't animated. So there's no point in hitting S to set keys for all of this. One thing that we will set up today, or you'll see how to set it up, is under the animate menu there is an actual set key button. And that set key button has an option box. So every time we're hitting S, it's setting a key with the options that we have set up there. So if I go into this, I can actually say that I only want to set keyable attributes from the channel box. And what that means is, let's say that I'm only going to be animating this thing moving from one side to the other. If I click on just the X and say set key, now I can move up, move it, and hit S, and it'll only set keys on what I've selected there. So that way I don't have to worry about right-clicking key selected. It saves me like a whole bunch of time, like seconds. Sweet. Undo is Z. So people like to hit Control Z because that's what it is in every other program. But Maya saves you a hotkey. You don't have to hit Control. Just hit Z, and that will undo the command that you did. If you hit Shift Z, that will redo the command that you just did. So if I move this up and then I undo it, I can hit Shift Z and redo that. Notice too that Shift Z is basically just like capital Z. So Maya will use uppercase and lowercase as 2 different hotkeys. Okay. Repeat action is G. If we've done something before, like in this case, let's say I grab some faces here and I extrude it and I extrude it and pull it out, and I want to extrude again, I can just hit G and extrude again, hit G and extrude again. Okay, so that's an easy way for us to be able to extrude over and over again without having to go back to extrude. Duplicating is Control D. So we grab an object, we hit Control D, we duplicate it. Now we have a copy of it. Now let me go to a new scene because this is getting clustered. Cube. So there's lots of instances where just duplicating an object, you can create some pretty cool stuff. So let's say that I put this here. I'm going to move my pivot all the way over here. And then I'm going to duplicate this, scoot it up a little bit, and then rotate it. Right? So that's how I can duplicate and have like there's one stair and then another stair. This should probably be up maybe a little bit more. Now Control D is just like regular duplicate. If I hold Shift and hit D, what it does is duplicate again. So whatever I just did, it'll do it again. And if I keep hitting it, eventually I can create these like cool staircases and other stuff too, but you know, for what we're doing. There's a bunch of cool stairs. Nice. And then what I can do is I can take those stairs and go to bullet. That's good. Oops. I have to freeze my transforms first. Just the scale, and delete history, center pivot, there we go. Now this should work. We'll find out. Come on. All right, oops. There we go. So now if I go into this and I say yes, this, and hit play, I can take have dynamics take over, and then it'll just animate everything falling down. Awesome. Cool. So that's how we can duplicate stuff. Now we can also group things together, and especially for what we're doing in animation class, a lot of this is going to be grouping, parenting, and organizing our stuff. So let's say, for instance, we have this platform. And let's say that it has a hinge. That's perfect. And I want this, this stuff to move together, okay? So if I grab both of these items and I group them together, now they will rotate together, okay? Before, what they were doing is rotating like this. One's pivot is going one way, one's pivot's going another way. So that doesn't work. So I hit Control-G to group them together, and now I can rotate them so that they actually like move together. Now, looking at what it did in the outliner, the group, or the grouping takes two objects, makes a null, and drops them into it. So very similar to like what Cinema 4D would do, is it makes a null object and drops those items in there. Maya just calls it a group. That's the only real difference. Now, the other thing that I could do instead of grouping it is I could tell Maya, hey, I want this object to be parented to this one. Okay, so that's the next hotkey, is parented. Group, parent. I'm going to grab this, I'm going to shift-click that one, and then hit P. And now, instead of having that null, it just takes that cube and says, okay, now you're a child of the cylinder. So when the cylinder moves, that cube is going to move too. So if I click on the cube, this doesn't do anything. If I click on the cylinder, that will rotate that. Okay. Now the advantages of this is that we can just click right on the cylinder. It's an obvious object, and it's very easy to rotate it around. The disadvantages is as I start rotating this in other directions, you can see that I'm kind of like losing something. Like this is acting like really funky, right? As one item is parented to another one, it starts to inherit some of these properties, okay? So because I took my cylinder and I rotated it 90 and then I scaled it these random values, when I rotate this, it's thinking that all of those values should be on that too, okay? So it's freaking out. It's not a huge deal to fix. I just have to freeze my transforms on both objects. Oops. I have to go into my options for freeze transform and set it to everything. There we go. And now I can grab this if I needed to and rotate it whichever direction, and it's fine. And I can still grab this and rotate it that way. Okay? So stuff we have to be concerned about. Now, this is a nice setup, again, because it's easy to grab, rotate, and do whatever. I can also duplicate the setup and scoot it over, and then duplicate it again, or hit Shift-D. That would have worked. I lied, it didn't work. There it goes. Sometimes Shift-D doesn't want to work. Right? So now I have all of these little bands right here, and if I grab all the bands inside this, they will all rotate like that. Right? So now if I wanted them to work like our stick does, all I have to do is parent them in an order that makes sense. So if I look at this, this guy here is probably the base one. He's probably like the main one. So then this one will be parented to this one will be parented to that one, and so on. So if I just grab this and, grab this here, and I just middle drag it into the cylinder 2, it automatically parents it to cylinder 2. If I grab cylinder 2, middle drag, cylinder 3, middle drag, cylinder 4. So all this is doing is just parenting all of these things together. This is no different than me grabbing the 2 items and hitting P. There we go. So now if I do this, you'll see that all of these rotate together. Now to get it to act like our stick would, I'm just going to grab each one of these cylinders. There we go. And then I'll go to rotate and rotate. You'll see that all of these kind of like rotate together. Pretty sweet. Okay. So that's how we can group things and parent them. If we want to unparent them, we can simply click on one of the child objects and hit Shift P, and it'll pull it out of that parenting grouping structure. We can also just open this up and just middle drag out of there, and it'll also unparent. Okay. If it's inside this, it's going to be connected to it. If it's outside of it, it won't be connected to it. Object component. So if I'm over here and I want to grab the vertices, I right click and hold. I can grab vertices and move them around. Okay, we've been through that. We've seen some of that before. If I grab faces, same thing. I can grab the faces and move those around. If I want to do that to multiple objects, I have this whole string of objects here. If I go to face, you'll see that it only puts the face mode on that last one I selected, or on the one I right-clicked on. Okay, so another way to do that is by hitting F8 on your keyboard. That takes you into component mode, meaning that you can grab faces and objects for, whatever items you have selected. So if you want to do something like the same thing to all of them, then that's what you would do, is just grab that. Oops. Now up here at the top, if you watch when I hit F8, you can see how where my arrow is, that's what's swapping. Okay, so this middle one is object mode, meaning I'm grabbing the whole object and moving that whole object. If I hit F8, that's component mode, meaning that I'm grabbing components, vertices, faces, edges, whatever. If I right-click on these, I can choose polygon vertices, and then they turn on, and then I can grab them. Or if I click that off, I can go over here to faces and turn faces on and grab that. Okay? And then whatever item I select, very easily I can just add that into the mix. So F8 is a huge tool for being able to manipulate lots of different things at once. And then you just use F8 to get back out of it. Hide selected, show selected. So if we have this item here that we want to hide it, we just hit Control H, and then it goes away. We want to bring it back, we have to find it inside the outliner. There it is. And hit Shift H. Okay? Or you can use just H, apparently. That's a new one. Okay? When you do hide something, look at the outliner. See how that one's just a little bit dimmer gray? That means it's hidden. And that's just like Maya's way to let you know. All right, that's good. Show selected is Shift H, as I said. Up here. These two will not be on the test, show wire and toggle reflect. I did not catch that they changed those. Those are not hotkeys anymore. They've removed that from being a hotkey. So you can cross those off. Those don't do anything relating to painting, as far as I saw. Let's go to a new scene again. It's not on the sheet? Okay. Well, maybe it's just on my sheet then. Painting. Where are we at? Modeling. Okay. So inside Maya, there's a any time you're using a paintbrush, it's basically using this thing called Artisan, and Artisan is the paintbrush tool. So in some cases you're actually painting, like colors or textures or whatever. In other cases, you're sculpting. So in this case, there it is. Oops. In this case, I'm going to sculpt onto the sphere. So as I click and drag, you can see how I'm able to sculpt different shapes onto the sphere. Gorgeous. If I need to change the brush size, I hold down B and left mouse button drag. B for brush size, and then I can drag left and right to change the size of the brush. If I hold down M and click and drag up and down, that will change the maximum displacement. So you can see how much this moved. Now that I've lowered that maximum displacement, it's only going to move a slight amount. Might be a little bit too soft. There it is. Okay, and then there's other stuff you can do too. I don't think I have those in there. Nope. You can hold shift and that will like smooth transitions. Okay, so very similar to what Cinema has, except you can't use the brackets in this one because Maya has those brackets already kind of like listed as other stuffs. All right, so this is how we can paint or how we can sculpt using Artisan. There's a bunch of tools right here. We can also go to our rendering. And under here, there's a texturing menu where you can use a 3D paint tool. And on this, I'm going to assign a new material. Yep. I'm going to assign a color. And then what this will allow me to do now is actually paint right on the surface of that. Okay. Now, we're not going to use this painting tool. It's basically anytime I use this inside Maya, it's more for kind of blocking in different areas of where I want stuff to happen. So if this was a, let's say, an emitter, I can basically say I want to emit only from the dark areas. Okay, so anywhere it's black, I want particles to come out of those areas. So that's an easy way to do that. Or if this is something I'm going to texture and I want just this area here to be a specific color or specific texture or whatever, I can do that too. When you get into the modeling class, sometimes you want certain surfaces to be a certain way. So let's say I have a street and I want like a puddle in the street in a certain spot. I can go in there and say I want the puddle to be right here. When I go into my other program, I can isolate that area and say that spot is a lot more reflective and has like ripply kind of water texture. Same thing there. And then I will save that masterpiece. And it's gorgeous. I won't save it. Never mind. All right. So that's what you can use Artisan for. There's a couple other spots, but that's the main thing. And then finally, snapping. Just delete that again. Delete that. And sphere. All right. So if I want to snap this sphere to grid lines, I hold down the X key and then I drag from here, and it'll snap just to the grid lines. Okay. This also works in other views. So if I'm in the front view and I hold X, it'll snap to those grid lines as well. I could also grab just the one direction and snap, and it'll also just snap in that one direction. Okay, so it's just snapping in the Y direction or the Z direction or the X direction. Okay, so that's snap to grid. I'm going to duplicate this one because I need a separate one. And I want to snap this sphere onto this one. So I'm going to hold down the C key. Let me make this bigger. That's perfect. All right. So I'm going to hold down the C key, and I'm going to middle click and drag. Oops, I need to go to wireframe. There it is. So you can see how this is snapping right to this edge, and it's letting it slide along that edge. Okay, so that's what snap to curve is doing. And then snap to point, I can just move this along any one of these points and it'll snap to that point. Okay, now this works for obviously just moving things. I mean, rotate's not going to do anything for that, or scale's not going to do anything for that, it's just moving. But it also works for where the pivot is. So if I had a polygon cone, there it is. The pivot for this is right at the center. I want the pivot to be at the bottom. So I'm going to hold down D to move the pivot and hold down V to snap to point and just drag this straight down. And you can see how the pivot is now locked to the bottom of that. Now I can hold down V and snap it right to any one of these points, and then just rotate it so it's like facing out from there. Okay. Now that process is much easier than me trying to go through and, move this into that spot and get it locked in correctly. Oops, there we go. Sweet. Okay. Now notice here too, snap to grid is X, snap to curve is C, and then snap to point is V. A little trick is that X looks like a grid intersection, C looks like a curve because it's curvy, and then V looks like you're pointing at something. So those are the snap to grid, curve, and point. Also, they're right next to each other on the keyboard, X, C, and V. Okay, so if you use that little trick to help remember the stuff, it'll go a lot easier. Transform, snap, and all those. Let's go to there. Let's go to this. Okay. So let's say that we wanted to rotate this object. If I go to my rotate tool and I just rotate it, I may want to rotate this exactly 90 degrees or exactly 45 degrees or whatever. By holding J and then rotating, it will snap in increments that I have set up. So there's 45, there's 90, there's 150, there's 180, and so on. Okay, so you can snap to whatever those direct dimensions are. You can also go through and rotate a little bit. Let's say I rotated it this far. Let's say 22.5. And then I want to rotate this. If I hold down J and snap, it's going to automatically jump to 30 degrees because that's the next increment. But if I hold down Shift J and do it, it'll just add 15 degrees to that. Okay, so at some point you may want to transform snap relative, which is Shift J and then rotating it. Now all those options are set up for how much it's moving or scaling or whatever, because they all have them. So if I go to scale and I use my J key, come on. Oops. J. On. My snap is stuck on, whatever. So if I just go to the options here, I can turn off, let me reset my tool. I can turn off my snap, which is right there, or I can turn it on and I can specify how many degrees I want to rotate. If I have something that I know I'm going to rotate it 45 degrees, I may just want that number to be 45. I also have move tool options. I also have rotate options. Turn that off. And there's scale options, turn that off. You can also get to the popular items by holding down whatever it is, move, rotate, or scale. And then using your left mouse button, you can turn on snap. Or you can change where your pivot is, or you can change how symmetry works. So there's a lot of different options for getting through all of those. Cool. So that's the hotkey stuff. So in 2 weeks you'll have a test. So make sure, obviously, you're using these things. The more you use them, the easier they're going to be to adapt to. The quicker you'll be able to work, the faster you'll get your work done, the less you'll have to hear me talk about getting your work done. Any questions on the hotkeys? No? All right.